Thank you so much for your commitment to your children and being here tonight. And I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Becky Kennedy and Britt Morin.
Oh, hello, everybody. Well, I just got introduced, so you don't need me to introduce myself again, but I am just so grateful to be here with a woman that I've admired for so many years. Before she was the icon that she is today, I knew her back when. I mean, not way back when, but I mean, this woman is who you think she is. Off stage and off Instagram and off, books as in real life. And I've just been so heartened that she would even come to Marin and do something like this for us. So just thank you again, Becky. I really appreciate it. I told her, I sort of guessed the age range of the kids, the parents and the kids that we have here tonight. But I would love to just do a really quick survey. So if you have babies and toddlers, raise your hand. If you have early elementary school kids, raise your hand. Late elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids, empty nesters? All right. We won't go there then. Does that help a little bit? Yeah, we know who we're getting to. Okay, so I want to start with this. You wrote a book called Good Inside. Raise your hand if you've read it. Yes, yes, yes. And obviously that's your company, and we all know about that. But what is the Good Inside philosophy that makes you and sort of your method different from everything else we've heard about parenting?
Okay, first of all, thank you all for coming out. This is the most amazing crowd. This is definitely the coolest venue I've ever been to.
We almost made rock star signs at her with AI, but we thought she would get offended.
It really is. And I just want to say, as we talk about so many different things tonight, just please remember, you're the people who came here. Your intention, nobody has free time. Parents do not have free time. You all carved out time. And I think too often we don't just pause and say, that really says something about me. That really means something. And so just please know that from my end, I think you're all incredible. And I hope you give yourself that credit as we, kind of learn together. The other thing is, as I speak about things, as you might know, I have kids. My kids are 6, 9, and 12. I do not do all these things with my kids. My husband is here. He would be like, yeah, she definitely doesn't. She yells. She says these things. I repair. We'll talk about that. And nobody needs a perfect parent, right? Our relationship with our kids really forms the foundation for what they will expect from their relationships later on. And I don't think any of us think it would be adaptive for our kids to go into adulthood kind of seeking out a partner who is perfectly attuned to their needs all the time. And so knowing that, please take some things from here. Know that when you go home, we all will go into our bad habits, our old habits, and we'll do new things little by little. Okay, so Good Inside. There's so many ways I can answer this question, but to me the simplest thing is that when I was being trained in how to work with parents, right? Because I wanted to get the best education, there's a lot of kind of institutes out there. I went to kind of the gold standard, and it was really all about punishments and timeouts and sticker charts and rewards and ignoring, and essentially kind of see good behavior, praise that to get more of it, and see bad behavior and kind of punish it to try to get less of it or extinguish it. And some of those words sound harsh, like extinguish, but to be honest, when I started this program, I was obsessed with it. I was every part of my left brain, right? The linearity, the logic lit up. I was this makes so much sense. And I think it does cater to those of us who are very linear and we like kind of logic in that way. But what I realized later on is that there were a lot of assumptions about kids that I think were driving that approach. Never named, but they were there, inherent in kind of their frameworks. Number one, I was it's kind of a system of behavioral control. You see behavior and you control it to get more of it or less of it. And I've always thought as kind of control and trust as opposites. I think that's a very powerful thing to think about in all of our relationships at work, in our partnerships, definitely with our kids. When we control someone, we're kind of saying, I don't trust you. And so we're raising generation after generation of kid kind of saying, I don't trust you, and so I have to control you. which is completely different from kind of the system built up from good inside, where I do believe kids are inherently good inside. I believe we're inherently good inside too. That doesn't mean that makes all their behaviors okay at all, right? But it does create something very helpful. It creates a gap. And I'm always drawn to gaps because then there's like a problem to solve. And to me, the gap is kind of looking over here. My kid's identity is good. Like they're inherently good. And I actually think this would be really helpful to take from this talk. I have a good kid. That is who they are at their core. That's their identity. And then over here, I have some not so good behavior. My kid just smacked his brother. My kid just lied to my face. My kid is screaming at night, even though, they're supposed to go to bed after 2 books. They're screaming for the 29th book, whatever it is. And that gap between good identity and bad behavior, or really a gap between who we are and what we do, allows us to be very curious and ask, why does my good kid do some not so good things? I find that helpful in adult relationships too, right? Why am I a good person who's doing some not so great things? And that foundation that our kids are inherently good inside allows us to hold on to the good kid underneath the bad behavior. And every intervention I talk about will come from that framework. In fact, when parents ask me about something that's going on in their home, that's always the place we start. Because usually when we're really frustrated with our kid, we've always lost that. I lose it too. We're like, why is my kid doing this? My kid's, lying to my face. My kid doesn't respect me, right? All of that is because we see bad behavior and we've collapsed it into bad identity. Bad behavior means a bad kid. And all of our interventions come from more of that behavioral control place. And so as a starting point, that idea of, wait, okay, my kid isn't listening to me. It's so hard to get out of the house in the morning. Wait, I have a good kid who's not listening in the morning. And if you can keep your hands separate, I promise, instead of watching them collapse, the interventions you'll come up with will be completely different. And I'll share some of them, of course, here. But that really is the foundation.
I love that, of course. And I think the other thing that we probably all succumb to is not just control, but fixing. We want to control, and if there's a problem, we fix it. And over the years, I've even asked you, I don't get what's going on with my kid. I told him, this is exactly how you do it. And then he, just shut down. What's wrong? And so can you also add on to control with, I love the bench analogy. Can you use the bench analogy?
Yeah. And I think probably fixing, and by the way, this is so my natural urge too. It's not like I'm oh, you have such an urge to fix. Not me. I'm just so chill about the things my kids do. Not at all, okay? So I'm with you, right? But controlling, fixing is kind of a form of control too. It's kind of a form of not trusting that my kid will figure this out, that I can help my kid figure this out, right? So if we go into this image, right, picture your kid kind of wandering around a garden. I promise this is going to be useful, okay? Go with it. So picture your kid wandering around a garden. And I really think this is kind of an image for how our kids experience life, right? And in this garden, their world, if you will, there's a lot of benches. And they're all just experiences or feelings, right? And we know this as adults. It's the bench, even as adulthood, of not getting the job I want. It's the bench of I got in a fight with my partner. It's the bench of I wish I didn't say this thing, to my boss, whatever it is. We have a million different experiences. And our kids kind of find us or ask us to come to them when they're on certain benches. Maybe it's the bench of I have a 3-year-old and I can't finish this puzzle and I want to, but I can't. And my kid's about to melt down. Maybe that's, let's call it the bench of frustration, right? Because the interesting thing is our kids won't ever, maybe not ever, our kids probably won't be frustrated with a puzzle when they're 30, but they definitely will be frustrated, right? And so the benches kind of never change. Or it's the bench of, I'm the only one who can't read. Or it's the bench of, I tried out for soccer and all my friends made the team but me. Okay, whatever the bench is. And I think a lot of us, when our kids are on a distressing bench, which there's many versions of. They're sad, they're frustrated, they're disappointed, they're jealous, right? We have the urge to do one of two things. We either kind of tell them their bench isn't their bench. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Everyone learns to read on their own time. Or I know you didn't make soccer, but you're the varsity, basketball captain, right? Or we say to them, like, look at that bench over there. It's so sunny. Can you just like come to, that bench with me? It's a little more pleasant, right? Which would maybe in the puzzle example be like, here, just put this piece over here, right? Okay, you were on the bench of frustrated. Now you're on the bench of successful. When we do both of those things, we actually make kids far less resilient and actually far less trusting of us. What do I mean less resilient, right? Because resilience to me is like the big thing we want our kids to be, or at least I want my kids to be. And to me, resilient is like I can go about the world and cope with the widest range of feelings as possible. That's really what resilience is. It actually goes back to feelings, which is why when people say feelings are soft, I'm like, I really don't see it the same way. It's a source of resilience. Because when my kid is 20 and they don't get a job they want, I want them to be able to be upset, kind of cope, think about their next steps, and move on. That's going to come only because they know how to cope with disappointment. They're not going to spiral, or maybe, because they're actually coping with that feeling, they'll be able to say, I wonder what I did in that interview. I'm so disappointed. I wonder, maybe I should, learn more about what happened. Now they can actually learn and grow versus deny it and say it's fine or spiral. So if resilience is being able to cope with the widest range of feelings possible, right? And be like, okay, well, how do we build that, right? And it's usually the opposite of kind of fixing or denying. So I'm going to go through 2 examples, and what I call this is like sitting on the bench, which I really think is the essence of resilience building. And I'll go through 2 examples that are a little counterintuitive, because our kid comes home and they say, I'm the only one who can't read. Now, if you're like any parent, it's so painful. But the reason we actually don't like sitting on the bench with our kid in that moment is because we don't like that feeling. Like our kid is kind of a pawn in our own emotion regulation game. We find it so painful. And so we say, you'll read at your own pace, or you're really good at math. But then what a kid learns is I'm feeling disappointed, and that kind of overwhelms me. Oh my goodness, my parent is overwhelmed by that feeling. Like now that feeling is literally scary to a child, right? Because a kid is learning, wait, if I'm overwhelmed by a feeling and my parent actually doesn't want me to feel that way, I guess this feeling really is bad. It is scary. It is toxic. It is unmanageable. The opposite of resilience. We often think also in that moment that saying to our kid, like, but you're going to read at your own pace is confidence building. It's actually confidence reducing, right? The way I think about confidence is it's not feeling good about yourself. It's trusting yourself. It's self-trust. That's all it is. It's self-trust. And a kid's kind of saying, I'm disappointed. I'm embarrassed. I'm the only one I can't read. And we're kind of saying, you don't feel that way. No. No. You're really good at math. And what they really learn is, oh my goodness, I guess other people are better at feeling my feelings than I am. I thought I was disappointed, but turns out I'm not. Turns out it's no big deal, right? But they already registered the feeling. So now next to the disappointment feeling, they have the self-talk of, I don't think I really feel this way, which I promise you is not the self-talk we want our kids going to adolescence and young adulthood with, because trusting your feelings is the essence of making safe decisions in tricky interpersonal situations. I see a lot of people nodding, right? Okay, so what can we do if it's not that? And I'm very, very concrete in strategies, because I know for me, when I hear ideas and don't know how to implement them in my home, I find it very frustrating. So I promise never to do that to you all. And to me, there's 3 lines that are the essence of resilience building and are really kind of like that sitting on the bench. And if you're thinking as I go through these lines, like, would these be helpful in my partnership? Or would these be helpful when someone at work comes up to me and says something upsetting? Like 1,000,000%, you don't even have to change one word. Okay, so my kid says, I'm the only one in my class who doesn't read chapter books. They gave out the books and I'm the only one who doesn't have a chapter book. First line, I'm so glad you're sharing that with me. Or I'm so glad you're talking to me about this. You're actually sending a really deep message to your kid in that moment. You're saying, the part of you who was going through this, I still like that part. It's literally what you're saying. I still like you even when you're not a good reader. Which also is, I think, what confidence is. Like, we know by the time we're adults, it's not feeling like the best at something. It's feeling like it's okay to be you when you're not the best at something. And what you're saying to your kid is, I like you when you're not a good reader. Which kind of makes a kid be like, oh, like, again, maybe I can be good inside even when I'm not such a strong reader. I'm so glad you're talking to me about this. Right? It makes me think when someone comes up to a manager at work, hey, this thing happened, and that meeting was really awful, and you really interrupted me all the time. Imagine if your manager said to you, I am so glad you're talking to me about this. It's really important. I feel like you'd walk out and you'd be like, I feel better. Like, we're good. That's like, you're the best manager ever. It's like the same thing. The second line to me is the ultimate confidence building line. And it's like what I want every parent to start saying to their kid. I believe you. That is what builds self-trust, is when kids learn my parents believe my feelings, that must mean my feeling is real. That doesn't mean a kid has permission to act in a certain way. We'll get to that, I'm sure. Totally separate. Because if a kid said to me, so I'm never gonna learn to read, I wouldn't be like, no problem. You feel that way. Cool. No. But I believe you is just saying the feelings you feel actually are real. That's all it's saying. And if confidence is self-trust, then that's really what builds self-trust. So I'll play this out. I'm the only one who can't read. Oh, I'm so glad you're talking to me about this. Yeah, they handed out all the books, and my friend got this, and my friend got this, and I got this picture book, I'm just going to say, I believe you. Third line is just tell me more. That is it. And this is the point where often parents, and me too, I'm actually a solution seeker, will say to me, okay, that's amazing. And then what? And then what? And if you're a and then what question asker, it's totally fine, I am too. It's like a great thing to tell yourself when I ask myself, and then what? 99% of the time, I'm going to tell myself, nothing. Because if we go back to the bench, what you're doing is your kid is saying, hey, Mom, I'm on the bench of I'm the only one who can't read. And what I'm doing there, and I could cry as I say this, is I'm literally sitting down next to them. I'm like literally warming the bench. I am a bench warmer, right? Truly, that's what I am. And what's so important to know is feelings are never the thing that overwhelm us, ever. Feeling alone in our feelings is always the thing that overwhelms us. And so when you say to a kid, oh, it's not a big deal, you actually leave them more alone. They were trying to get your support, and now they're more alone. It literally makes them feel worse, right? When you sit down, I'm so glad you're telling me about that. I believe you. Tell me more. You're actually removing the aloneness, right? I always say we can't change the hard, we can change the alone. And the irony is, when you change the alone, in this image, your kid will get up from the bench before you will. They will, I swear. Like, yeah, and then I kept reading this book and nothing, I don't know, I was in a group of one. Oh, I hear you. I swear, when you do that, they'll be like, can I have a snack? Oh, and let me tell you what happened when I was playing soccer at recess. I scored 2 goals. And you're like, what just happened? But they will, because they were seeking your connection the whole time. They were looking for connection. They were looking to be believed. That is all they were looking for. And so when you speak deeply to that need, the rest often kind of comes from there.
I want to validate what she's saying as a marital tip. My husband's over here. How often do I say, tell me more? I believe you. I'm so well trained on Dr. Becky. It's ridiculous. And it works. But I'm going to pivot from that and say, I know a lot of you, I've talked to some of you before this, have a kid that's more of an individualistic, quiet, introverted, deeply feeling kid who I have one too. When I try to say, tell me more, he actually doesn't. He shuts down, he's like, and it's almost as if I pitched this idea to Dave the other day, I want to buy him a diary, but a boy version I want him to get it out because he's not able to talk about it. And I think some of us here also have kids that just won't talk about it. Mm-hmm. As much as we're sitting on the bench, I really do feel like I'm on the bench with him. And I think he knows that, but he still won't get over the line. What else should we do?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things that come to mind here. First of all, and I was saying this to a small group before, we underestimate how helpful we can be to kids, even if we don't know the details of their story. Right? And again, I come back to myself a lot. I think we forget to use ourselves as that tool. Well, what if I was going through something hard and even the most supportive friend in my life, I just didn't want to talk to them. And I'd say to myself, yeah, I could see why that could be. And okay, and if she was trying to get me to talk to her. How would that feel? I think we know, like, that would feel so bad. Almost would feel like, are you doing this for you? Are you doing this for me? I don't know. Now, if she said nothing to me, would that be helpful? No. I think sometimes when we're in a tough place and we can't talk, we can interpret someone's distance as like evidence that, see, nobody wants to hear, right? So maybe that wouldn't feel great. But there probably is something in the middle. And I do ask myself a lot, like, what would my friend say to me? Even if I said to her, hey, I don't want to talk about it, or I have nothing to say. And I think we can like dance around that space with our kids more than we do, right? I don't know, what would it sound like? Something like, hey, look, I could be wrong, you know you best, but I have a sense something's going on with your friends. I have something's going on the soccer field. And look, you don't have to talk to me about it. I know I often feel better talking to people, but not everyone does. And whatever is going on, you're going to see this circle back. Whatever is going on, I believe you. Saying to a kid, whatever's going on, I believe you, when you know nothing of what is happening, is so powerful. And again, just think about it with you. If your friend said, whatever's going on, I believe you. I'm here if you want to talk. And just want to let you know that. And that's it. It's not going to be magic. They're not going to start opening up. But I think if we shift from how can I get my kid to talk to me, how can I just let my kid know I'm a non-judgmental support, then all of a sudden we can say, oh, that's actually easier to do. I can sprinkle it places. And I don't feel like I have to get my kid to say something for me to feel successful. In general, I think shifting our definition of parenting wins from our kids' behavior to what I call just showing up as a sturdy leader is like a massive change. That's better for the whole system. It's better for us. We're not dependent on my like 4-year-old doing something for me to feel good about myself. And I'm looking at what's in my control, just like any other relationship, right? Instead of what might be out of our control. The other thing I'll share here, that for deeply feeling kids, and if you're not aware of that term, that's totally fine, but it's kind of this term I coined, honestly, after I had my second kid. And my first kid definitely had challenges, but he was a little more like linear in that I would do the thing and he'd kind of be like, yeah, that feels good. I mean, he wouldn't say that, but he'd calm down. And in my practice this whole time, I'd have people saying, like, Becky, I'm doing the thing you told me. And I swear it's like making things worse. Like my kid shuts down, they yell, I get more upset. And I think in the back of my head, I was like, I don't know if you're doing it right, But to their face, I was very nice.
You just thought about me when I was saying
that? Yeah, maybe. No, I've evolved since that because I had my second child, and I was like, oh my goodness, there really are kids who have that reaction. Like, it took one to fully believe it. And it really made me totally rethink like what a certain group of kids need. And so if this sounds like your kid, for these deeply feeling kids, their vulnerability sits so close to their shame that one like cannot get activated without the other. So when these kids are upset, when these kids are disappointed that they're not reading or weren't invited, or right, they immediately feel shame, which actually makes an emotion feel like an attacker. They feel like attacked by their feelings. So if you have a kid where you're like, yeah, whenever they're upset, they like literally try to like scratch me, and like they can trip and be embarrassed, but all of a sudden they're screaming at me and saying I tripped them, even though I was literally on the other side of the soccer field. I have one of those kids too. And then when you try to say to them like, oh, that was embarrassing, they're like, I hate you. And you're like, what just happened? I'm just trying to help you, right? It's because the shame is so intense. They truly deeply fear being too much, and they fear they're gonna overwhelm you, which almost makes that cycle a little more self-fulfilling. And so these kids, I say, they reject front door strategies. It's like if they're in their house and they're upset and you're like, hey, I'm here to help, they slam the door in your face. But what's often happening with these kids is then they slam the door and we say back to these kids like, you're so dramatic, or I was just trying to help. And then in their house, they're kind of alone, which we know now is the problem. And they just kind of say to themselves, see, like I really am as toxic and bad and poisonous as I worried I was. I get very emotional when I talk about these kids because I feel like we can really change this. And these kids need what I call side door approaches. They are actually desperate for someone to be in their house with them. Like they need it, but they will reject you every time you try that front door. And so for kids like this, they need things like, hey, I'm just gonna say some things and you're gonna think most of them are weird, and that's totally fine, because deeply feeling kids, before they accept your closeness, they need to reject you. I mean that. It's like a dance, just like teenagers. They need to push you away, so on their own time, they can kind of take it in. Let's say, let's say it's like the reading the book thing, right? I went through my beautiful example with my non-deeply feeling kid, and they're just kind of sitting on the bench. If I said that to my deeply feeling kid, she'd be like, that never happened, even though she just told me the story, right? So I'd say, I'm just gonna say some things, and all I want you to do is give me a thumbs up if I'm right, a thumbs to the side if I'm kind of right, kind of wrong, and a thumbs down if I'm totally wrong. And I'd say to my kid, you don't even have to look at me, because they probably don't want to make eye contact. It's literally too intimate and too kind of fearful. So I'd say, okay. And the first thing I'd say is something ridiculous to get a thumbs down. I would do that purposely. And this is where you're like, I crushed this moment. My kid thinks they won. We both won. I'd say, okay, you're really upset because, and then I don't know, let's say, my daughter was super into, a certain basketball team in New York. Like, I said that we were gonna go to the basketball game and you were gonna get to play an NBA game, and then we couldn't. And she'd be like, oh, that's obviously not what happened, right? And she'd put her thumbs down. And then I might say, oh, it's so annoying when people around me get chapter books and I don't. And I would bet money that my kid would have her head in the pillow, and she'd probably go like this, right? Because she can't gratify the thumbs up. I can't be that good of a parent. And what's so interesting with deeply feeling kids, parents will say to me, I did that, and I didn't want to ruin the moment. And I was just like, okay, I'm gonna go get you water now, we're done. And my kid will say to me, ask me more questions. Every time. Because they're so desperate to be seen and known, but they have to titrate closeness in such an intense way. And so, yeah, that's only one example, but there are these, you can see these are side doors. I've got to kind of sneak around the shame and connect to my kid in other ways.
I have more questions, but I also want to pitch. If you haven't yet, we're going to take questions from the audience. There's a QR code in the program, and so we'll start that in 10 or 15. Not similar to that, deeply feeling kid. There's also the kid that's back to the introvert, doesn't have friends really, doesn't like to play sports, is kind of the weird one. And I think this crowd especially, we live here in Marin,
Fix
this
that.
generation.
Fix that.
Well, I read this, there's a stat I saw last week that 70% of 13-year-olds are dropping out of sports completely because their parents are overscheduling them and they end up hating it. So maybe they're maybe these kids are going to be the ones that are saved. But I feel we all want to help them. We want to put social groups and play groups and all these things to make sure that they have friends and they have a thing. Should we? Is that going to be bad for them?
Well, I feel you're asking a really deep, poignant question here. Underneath that also, really important question, which is just what is it like to have a kid who's very different from us and who kind of doesn't live the life that's in line maybe with the way we live our life? And I think this is a really important question because I think it's really hard. And I think it's painful in a lot of moments too, because really there's this merger. Are those my kid's feelings? Are those my feelings? Does my kid need more friends? Do I need them to have more friends? Is that for me? Is that for them? There's actually no clear answers to this. I actually think if you're someone who's willing to ask yourself those questions, you're in the best place possible. I'm gonna quote someone else here because I find this, to me, one of the most compelling things to think about as a parent. I don't know if any of you read Andrew Solomon's Far from the Tree. It's a very, very long book. But I recommend everyone at least read the first page of the preface. No, but I mean that. That's what I'm gonna quote from. I swear I read more than that, but I mean that. I really do, okay? Because his first line is, there's no such thing as reproduction. And he says reproduction is a fallacy. It's a wish. We wish to reproduce. When we have a baby, we produce. And everything about what's hard about parenting can be summed up in that difference. And what he says is parenting is really being forever cast into a relationship with a stranger. That's really what it is. And I think he's right. And I think when we say it that way, it's not as compelling, But I think that's interesting. We all say we reproduce. We do not reproduce. And I think when you have a kid like you're describing, you know that. But we fight that a lot. And so I think when you have a kid who, let's say you're very social and your kid doesn't really like to go to group things and kind of likes their one friend a year, or you were a collegiate athlete and, and I think a lot of us, none of us are above this, I'm not, we all somewhere try to live out the unconscious, unfulfilled dreams of our childhoods, in our kids. You know, like they're going to have more resources than I did, and I can get them private lessons. And so they're going to play D1, and we can lose again. Like, who is this for? Is this my wish? Is this their wish? And they do like to keep me happy, but is that why? I just think if we're messing around in there, we're doing a good job because there's no clarity. But I just think actually those are the questions that are important to ask. Like, is my kid happy reading a book, right? Do they not want to see friends? We can still push. I think our job is to still push toward the edges, right? And I think once in a while as a parent, you know, like, ooh, I'm gonna say we have to go to one birthday party every so often. Like, I just think that's my push, right? And part of my job is to expose kids to things that are uncomfortable, you know? But probably another part of my job is trying to like do that work of like, yeah, like separating me from my kid.
How much do you see kids change as they grow? Like, what do they age out of versus like, what are behaviors we actually should try to help nip in the bud?
It's a great question. You know, I actually get versions of that question a lot. Like, when will my kid stop having tantrums? When will my kid stop, you know, screaming, I hate you? You know, things like that. And what I really think about there is age does not give skills. Like, that's true. Like, what I would say to someone is, well, like, they'll say, like, is my kid going to stop having these massive meltdowns at age 7? They're 4. And I say, well, what are you doing between age 4 and age 7? That's what my question would be. If we're not doing anything to build the skills our kids would need to learn how to manage frustration instead of be overwhelmed by it, your kids' tantrums will look different at 7, but they will definitely still have tantrums. They also might avoid things that are challenging. They might have a hard time in school when they actually have to learn how to read because your relationship with frustration is one of the biggest impacts on your ability to learn academic skills. Just how much you can tolerate this is hard. And okay, how much kind of hard have I learned to tolerate is a huge underlooked at, you know, kind of factor in kids' academic progress. That doesn't mean ADHD or learning disabilities aren't a thing. Those are 100% a thing. But I think that question of like, what am I doing in those years? And this is why, as you know, like, I think the bigger picture and what led me to start Good Inside and more than as an approach, like our membership and our, you know, all the things we do is we literally have the hardest job in the world. Being a parent is the hardest job in the world. And I also think it is literally the most impactful job in the world on our lives and on the world. And I just don't know any other job that is hard and impactful that we are given zero resources for. Zero, right? If my friend was a surgeon and it was like, I don't know if I like the surgery I'm doing and no one, you know, my patients all seem to be a mess and I ask questions. They were like, yeah, I never went to medical school. I'd be like, I don't think you're a bad surgeon. It sounds like you were under-resourced, really. And so I think the flip side is something very empowering. Like, if my kid is having tantrums and I think, oh, I would like them to grow out of this. They don't grow out of it. No one just starts swimming as an adult. You have to learn how to swim. And I actually think that's very hopeful because there actually are a lot of resources out there now where we can learn what we need to learn so we can teach our kids. And I think when you have that coaching mindset, like, I'm a coach. I'm literally my kid's coach. And coaches teach skills. And then they practice skills outside of game time. They don't wait till the game is on the line to hope that their player shoots a free throw and makes it for the first time ever. They literally do that in practice over and over. And when a kid has a bad game, they might pull them out, but then they'll say like, hey, we got to work on some stuff, right? And that kid's not going to get better in 4 years if we're not kind of, you know, doing that coaching. And I think that framework is, you know, exactly how I think about it.
All right, I know that we're in Marin County, and this is one of the more well-off counties in the country. And I fear this for my own children, that like they're growing up with such entitlement of things that just they look around and see are coming to them. Like they're not given all of the obstacles in their life. And I worry that they're gonna go to the real world and not be prepared. They don't have the skills. And so then I'm like, what should we like move away for a year and somewhere like, I don't know, like a different country or a small town or like middle of America? Like, how do I show them the world and what's really out there to prepare them for what's to come?
Yeah, great question. And honestly, one of my favorite questions. Because right, I think when I ask parents, like, what do you want for your kid? Name the quality you most want for your kid. I actually hear a huge range from parents. I want them to be creative. I want them to feel confident. I want them to be driven. I want them to have healthy relationships, whatever it is. And then when I say, what is the one quality you don't want? There's like a lot of universality and like this ickiness. Like, I just really don't want an entitled kid, right? And I get that. I don't want entitled kids either, and I don't want anyone to have entitled kids. So how do we kind of interact with our kids when they're young to help them be on the pathway to not end up in that entitled zone? And I think it starts like anything else. I often say we have to understand before we intervene, right? We all love to intervene, but you can't actually fix a kid's, layup if you don't actually know what the problem is. And it could be a whole lot of things. So not all interventions are equal until you understand. So let's understand entitlement. I'm going to share with you my definition of entitlement, and it's going to sound odd, but then I'll break it down, and hopefully it'll make a little more sense. I think entitlement is actually the fear of frustration. It's the fear of frustration, okay? What do I mean by that? So I'll share a story from my private practice that to me is like that utmost kind of entitled kid vision, right? Parents came to me after this happened. They had a 16-year-old son. They were flying back from Hawaii. And they were, I think they called the first boarding class, and it was like first class and whoever, and the kid gets up to board. And the parents, they were like, oh, we're not flying first class. We're not boarding yet. And they were like, and my 16-year-old son had a full-out tantrum in the airport. Like yelling, screaming at us, full-out tantrum, right? Which I think it is. And they were like, this is every parent in my social circles, worst nightmare. And I mean that these were kind parents, well-meaning parents, like really hardworking parents. Neither of them grew up with money. They like made a different life for themselves. And I think they came to me and be like, how did we get here and how can we change course? And so we did kind of like a history. And I did start to notice like patterns, right? And it seemed like in this kid's life, and it doesn't always have to do with money, but money, to be honest, it is the quickest way to buy your way and your kid's way out of frustration. And it's almost hard, and I mean this, like such empathy, it's hard not to, right? So this was a kid, I remember he was a soccer player, and he didn't make the kind of city soccer team that was local, and he came home, he didn't make it, and it was just like right away, like we have a driver, and we're gonna take you to this place in New Jersey, and you're gonna go on that team. So if I think about his body in this moment, and think about this with me, what happened? He felt frustrated. When our kids are young, they're learning, what are my expectations around feelings? What feelings do I have to tolerate? What feelings are tolerable? And what feelings should I try to exit from ASAP and kind of expect to be exited from? And this wasn't just soccer. This was kind of a pattern of a kid felt frustrated, right? And it was gone, right? I remember them saying, we remember when we just stopped riding the subway, right? We didn't have to ride the subway. We don't want to wait for the subway. And it was just always an Uber and then a driver. And there's nothing wrong with any of those individual decisions, but you can see if all of these come together, you know what happens when you ride the subway in New York City? Like you wait and you miss a train, like you do, right? And then you're like, oh, that stinks. I'm going to be late. And you're frustrated. And if you're riding the subway, you just are frustrated. And then your body learns to be frustrated and you learn that you can get through it. And that's a circuit in your body where you kind of know frustration happens and I can cope with it. Now, what I think about when I think about the 16-year-old kid is people are like, that sounds like an awful kid. I met this kid and he wasn't. And I actually think entitled kids, like I feel like they're very vulnerable. There's something very young and I find sad about it. That they have no more ability to tolerate frustration than a baby. I mean that. And it's actually worse because if you think about frustration and what comes after is the kind of created exit from frustration. If you go back to the bench, what a kid learns is I'm frustrated and my parents will run circles to have me not feel this way. They will. And so, wow, this feeling must be bad. It's literally fear because I feel it. I feel extra alone in it. Other people want me to not feel. I'm kind of yanked off that bench. Well, guess what happens when you're 16? Not from one of these things. If this is a pattern, you feel frustrated, and in this case, there was not an exit. and your body is literally terrified. You're like, I can't sit here. Like, get me off of this. For 16 years, someone has yanked me off. They've shown me anything else. I am not supposed to feel this. Feeling is going to kill me. Like, it's literally what it feels like. Okay, so we're going to get to something more hopeful. You're all like, this is depressing. Okay. I promise you. Okay, I won't leave you with that. Have a good night. Hope you have a good dinner conversation with, whoever you're here with. No. Okay, so I live in Manhattan. My kids have a lot of privileges, for sure. And I remember my oldest was young, and I was like unloading the dishwasher, okay? And I was like, come do the silverware part, because he was young enough to do it. I remember him looking at me being like, why do I have to do that? I don't know if he said this, but I feel like he might have been like, do we have someone who does that? And you're like, this is so cringeworthy. But kids are just a product of their environment, and they're just putting patterns together. And I remember something I said to him. I was like, okay, I kind of regulated myself. And then I was like, no, we're going to do this together. And he's like, why? And I said something that's become like a little bit of a principle of mine. I was like, to be a good person, you just have to do things you don't want to do. That's why. And so you're going to unload the dishwasher, and every once in a while we're going to fold laundry together. And you know how I generally drop you off with our babysitter after I pick you up from a play date before I go to run errands that are boring? Yeah, you're going to come and start to do things like that with me. Like I'm going to make sure that frustration and things that aren't for your pleasure are just built into your life. That's like the only way around it, right? Because I think if we're an adult and you feel like, I've earned this life, and I wouldn't disagree, but I think we can't raise our kids in a candy store and expect them to appreciate candy. It's just not possible. And so every once in a while, they have to do things that are not fun, that aren't for them. Every once in a while, they got to unload the dishwasher, right? Me and my husband, we joke that when we're in an airport or at like a stadium, and there are those things you have to like weave, around. It's so easy when they're empty for kids to just duck under them. Me and my husband, it's like a policy. No, really, you don't duck under. Sometimes, I love the entrepreneurial spirit. I'm sure you do too. I do, okay? But sometimes it's important for kids to know that you have to follow the rules and you have to go around. You just do. And like, there are little moments like that, right? We don't have to I actually think those moments over and over matter way more than moving for a year somewhere, right? There are moments like that you just have to be mindful of. And if you have a good amount of wealth, it is like that much more of a burden. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you can't have it both ways. Whatever percentage of the time we have to, with our kids, do the harder thing. Do the thing that makes us wait. Take the subway. Like, we just do.
Well, I'm going to go to Q&A in a minute, but I
Okay.
have one little follow-up.
Great.
So if I'm like, okay, you're going to unload the dishwasher
Right.
with me, my kid's going to go, no. And then do I do the carrot or the stick?
Great. So I think I think that we can probably, I think I would recommend something different from that, right?
Okay.
Okay, so.
Cool.
I think we have more options than a carrot and a stick. I think we really limit ourselves. Like, there's many more things, So to me, I would start small, right? Like, and maybe you're like, my kid would never unload the dishwasher. That doesn't mean you've lost your kid forever. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent. That actually is a way of saying to you, that's not the place to start. I will seriously never forget my second grade teacher saying to me, if something feels too hard to do, it just means the first step isn't small enough. I literally will never, it's like a mantra for me when I'm doing anything at work. And so I'd be like, what is the smallest step? Is it my kid putting their clothes away? I mean this, after somebody's folded them. It could be. Someone's like, it's not that, it's putting away just their socks. Great, that's fine. So I think, what's the smallest step? And then outside of that moment, I'd actually share this with your kid. I'd say something like, hey, I want to talk about something. There are so many things where we're so fortunate and we are able to do things with ease, right? We don't have to take the subway. We have this, we can take Ubers. And that is amazing in some ways. And it's going to actually really hold you back in other ways. And your kids will be like, why would that hold me back? It's lovely to take an Uber. And you could say, well, learning how to wait and learning that things don't go your way all the time is actually one of the things that will make you really successful and happy in life. And one of my big jobs as your parent is to actually make decisions that I know are good for you long term even when you're not happy. And this is kind of one of those things. So you're going to start to notice a couple things shift around here. And if this is true, you can use yourself. You can say, and especially the dishwasher, I bet this would work. When's the last time you saw me unload the dishwasher? When's the last time you saw me fold laundry? And your kid might be like, I don't know if I've ever, And you'd be like, I know. I've gotten so used to not doing that. We don't have to feel guilty. Because I think so many times, like, privilege has such guilt. It's not guilt, just that we don't feel guilty. That's true. It's important to still do those things. It's not fun. Let me be clear. It is not fun. That's kind of also what entitlement is, right? It's like the entitlement to every part of your day being fun. Just, right? That's definitely not life either, right? And so it's not fun. And that's actually part of why we're going to do it. Now, here's a little trick. We're going to make it a little fun. Like, I'm actually going to say, I don't want to do the dishwasher. And you're going to say to me, Mom, you have to. It's been too long, and you have to. You can make it fun. You could play a song, right? So I think there's all these ways if you level with your kid, right? I wouldn't say to them, I heard this story about a tantrum in an airport, and I don't want you to get there. I wouldn't use like that, But just level with them and connect. And it's amazing, like, how kids will really take that in and start to participate.
I love that. All right. I've got some Q&A. Ooh. Well, we just talked about frustration, so I'm going to skip that one. Sibling dynamics. Do you have advice for parents whose older siblings are highly annoyed or triggered by their younger sibling 90% of the time?
Wow. Yes. Okay. So again, and honestly, I feel like if you take nothing else from this, if you can take the idea, like, what is the core issue here? Do I actually understand the problem? That is the most important thing. If you understand the problem and you're annoyed at your kid, I mean this with love, you don't understand the problem. Or at least you don't understand it in a way that's going to be effective. And so we have to get to an understanding. I mean this. That kind of leaves us saying, like, oh, like you start to like your kid again when you understand it, right? Because, like, when you're really frustrated with your kid, why is my kid always mean to his sister? You don't like your kid in that moment. Like, I know you do at the core, but you don't. And what that means is you're approaching your kid from a me versus you, where you are the problem mindset. I always say this is very true in a marriage, okay? And very true at work too. We should not approach anyone we're having conflict with until we get to a me and you together against a problem mindset. So important, because the other person will just get defensive. It's not effective. So here, right? My older kid is triggered by his younger sibling. And my guess is then has a whole host of, like, not so great behaviors around that, right? Here's a me against you where my kid is the problem mindset. What is wrong with my son? I mean, he's 9 years old already. This is ridiculous. Why can't you just be nice to your sister? I know I'm in that mindset by the tone I'm using, by kind of, you can even see I'm like looking at you. If you could just figure it out. Versus, I wonder what's going on for my kid that's leading to this not nice behavior. Or, I wonder what's blocking, this is great, I wonder what's blocking my kid's access to, like, generosity and kind words. And then you can say to yourself, what blocks my access? And I think we all could be honest with ourselves, right? We feel insecure, we feel jealous, right? And the key thing to know about sibling dynamics is not the whole thing, but so much of why kids are not nice to siblings actually comes from the fact that they're seeing their sibling as a threat. And the honest thing is our kids kind of are threats to our other kids, right? At the core, kids are oriented by attachment. They need attachment to us, their parent, to survive. It's literally how they get food, shelter, and water. And so kids are always paying attention to what is maximizing connection, what is threatening, and their sibling, in some ways, actually does threaten that, right? It's like another person who needs all that stuff from us. Now, if you also have a sibling who is, I don't know, particularly good at all the things, and they're the star athlete, or going back to the kids in our family who are different from us, if you have a kid who's very similar to, I skied at college. I didn't, by the way, but I skied, and my kid's is this amazing skier, right? That might be triggering to my older kid who, let's say, really likes art and likes to read when me and my partner aren't really into that, because my kid's kind of like, wow, this kid is an extra threat. So I think that's important to think about first. One-on-one time with your kid without your phone. It's literally the most important parenting strategy there is for anything. Any behavioral problems, the first intervention after understanding should be, can I just spend one-on-one time with my kid without our phones? And that is it. It's like connection capital building on steroids. And it helps the kid feel more secure in your connection, which helps them act out less. So that's what I would do. And then I would actually level with our kids. Too often we don't say to our kids, like, there's something about your sister it's really hard to get along with. Doesn't mean you're throwing her under the bus. Like, what is it? And if you know, it's okay to say it. Hey, I'm just thinking it could be kind of annoying to have a sister who's like always making the soccer team and is like always out with her friends. And that could be kind of hard. Like, we're often afraid to say that because we often say the opposite. Why can't you just be nice to your sister? In which case we just create more of a binary. You're the bad kid and your sister's the good kid. So a way to reverse that is spending more time and actually just kind of normalizing, right? And that actually, again, removes the aloneness in whatever your kid was struggling with, which is often the foundation for so much positive change.
Is it? I also see that sometimes like the dad and one kid will be more like in the mom and the other kid. And so they're like, should you knowingly switch time so you have that connection time with the other parent? And like, do you have any advice for couples doing this together as parents?
I think kids love getting time with both their parents. You know, if they have like a, one secure, we know that kids who have kind of one secure relationship with one adult in their lives, that's hugely protective. So like, I think that's like, a lot of parents be like, okay, they put a lot of pressure like on all the dynamics, but one is huge. Obviously more is probably always better, or like icing on the cake. So yeah, and I think if you're having a harder time connecting to one of your kids, like adopting, I call it this like naive scientist mindset, I find to be really helpful. Like kind of again, like my kid is a stranger. Like what are they into? Like, oh my goodness. And just for 5 minutes, I just want to learn about this, I don't know, this thing that I have no idea about. And just ask questions. Tell me about that. What do you like about that? Oh, really? Right? And just connecting with them. I think it's not like something you have to do, but it's definitely a nice to have.
All right, the inevitable screen time question. When should I get my kids a phone? How much is too much? What about when they're teenagers? What's going to be good or bad? Should I have my phone out around them or not around them? Like,
great.
School us.
Great. I don't know if I can school you. That's actually important. Nobody feels good about their kid in screen time. I mean it, not one person, and it's impossible to, because these things are built into our kids' lives, and we all know that it's like a weapon they have access to that they're not ready for. I don't think any of us feel ready to like manage our phones in a responsible way. So again, it's just something I think everyone's struggling with, and if you're struggling with it, and you're talking to other people about it, and you're open to different ideas, I think that's the best it gets. So this is something we're working on. We're gonna be putting out this kind of guide to giving your kid a phone. And I'll share a couple ideas from it. Number one, and this is something I would say about so many things that have nothing to do with the phone. You are the leader of your family. And I think that's really important, right? I always say, you're the pilot of the plane. And if you are flying from San Francisco to New York, and at any point you received some type of data that made you think you had to change paths, you would, and you should. And if passengers said, I don't want to make an emergency landing in Iowa. This is so annoying. I'm going to miss my meeting. Imagine the pilot who's like, okay, don't want you to be mad at me. No problem. Right? And I actually think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. We actually do that to our kids all the time, and it makes them feel incredibly unsafe. And then we say our kids take advantage of us. No, we just made our kids feel unsafe without leadership, so they're more dysregulated because they feel so confused and untethered, just like you would on a plane. You would no longer be scared that you were going to have an emergency landing. You'd be terrified that this person was your pilot, right? Now, that also doesn't mean as a pilot you want to hear, stop screaming back there, you actually want to hear something that's look, I know this is annoying to you. I know this isn't what you want. My job is to make good decisions to prioritize your safety. Right? And something I say to my kids, when I can remember, which is, 10% of the time, in the moments I want to say them, it's hey, I love you so much that I'm willing to make decisions that I know are, going to lead to you protesting. That's actually how much I love you. My number one job is to keep you safe, not happy. This is it's so funny. I go inside, we see all these young kids who fill out these Mother's Day, Father's Day things my parents' favorite color is blank. My parents' job is to, and all of them send them up. It says, keep me safe. And that is our job, is to keep our kids safe, not keep our kids happy. Trying to keep them happy actually makes them unsafe. It makes them trust us less, just like we would not trust a pilot who are prioritizing our happiness over our safety. I promise I'll get back to phones. I haven't lost the train of thought. Okay, so the first thing about giving your kid a phone is don't give your kid a phone if you wouldn't empower yourself to make any decisions that are different about their phone at any day you find out more information. Parents say this all the time, like, my kid has 2 hours of screen time. Like, I know it's not right. Meanwhile, maybe 2 hours is right. I'm just making up a number for your family. Like, I don't know. What am I going to do? My kid's bedtime is 9 p.m. and they're young and I know it's too late. What am I going to do? I mean, that's like literally a pilot being like, I don't know, we're about to crash, but like, what am I going to do? I don't want to land in Iowa. You know, we'd be like, just land in Iowa. Like, you know? So I actually think that's really important with something like a phone to say, I will not give my kid a device unless I empower myself to say at any moment, I could. Obviously, the way I do it matters, but I could change my guidelines, right? We're not changing it because our kid's upset. We're changing it for the opposite reason, because we feel like we have more information to make a better decision. Next thing about a phone is when you give your kid a phone, I think it's super important to ask yourself the question, like, why am I giving my kid this phone? And I don't mean that as a facetious question, not like, I guess there's no reason, Dr. Becky. Like, that's totally not what I'm saying. You probably have a reason. But let's say it's my kid does soccer with somewhere else, I don't know, and I want them to be able to reach me. Okay, so one of the reasons you want to give your kid a phone is to be able to reach you. Cool. Okay, so then I'd say, if we're going through this, well, what about, like, if we go through all the reasons, it might happen where you're like, they really don't need access to internet. That's not why I'm giving them a phone. Interesting. They don't really need to be able to text anyone but me, at least not in the beginning. Because when you're giving a kid a phone, I would ask yourself that question, and the first version of a phone I would give your kid is a pure manifestation of why you're giving your kid that phone, right? Giving a kid a phone is not the same thing as giving them Snapchat. Like, I know so many families like, I'm giving my kid a phone, and then all of a sudden they have like 20 apps that they never had before. And I think that's really easy to do. But if you get ahead of it, it's actually kind of easy not to do. To be like, no, like once you get a new device, you should have no more apps or access than you had maybe on your iPad at home. This is like a new device. We have to get used to it. I have to see how you manage it, see if you can still put it away, right? I think that's so, so important. One other baseline rule I would say, ground rule, phones do not charge in a kid's room. There's a time your kid puts the phone away, and it is not in their room. I know parents were like, they're never allowed to have a phone in their room. I'll be honest, in our family, our oldest kid is in 6th grade. He has a phone. 2 things around that really matter. When he gets home, he puts his phone in a box in the kitchen and then goes to do his homework. There's no phone when he has his homework. It's too distracting. It's not, anything he would need it for. And he never sleeps with his phone in his room, right? And so again, like, you're giving your kid a phone to work for you, right? For the things, and maybe to help them too. And you might say, one of the reasons I'm giving my kid a phone, or what I want to add on is, let's, is so he can talk to his friends. That's okay. But just remember, okay, that's actually within my reason now. And what guidelines would I want, right? Another thing we tell our son is, yes, like, we need to know the passcode to your room. And the way the passcode to your phone. And what I say is, I would never usually just go search through your room. Like, that's not the style of parent I am. We're connected. I'm never just going to go randomly turn over everything in your room. And at any point, I could. That is true. Same thing with your phone, right? And yes, I will be looking at your text messages. That is actually, like, again, you're young. You have access to this. I know your brain isn't developed enough to make the best decisions. I know even simple things. You don't even know text message etiquette. Like, you'll see the things your kids will write. You're like, someone's like, hey, do you want to come over for a birthday party? I'd love to have you over. And your kid doesn't even respond. And you're like, oh my God, because they don't know. They don't know etiquette, right? So we say that to our, kid too. Yes, at any point, like, we could look through it, and we probably will, again, because our job is to protect our kids and keep them safe, not keep them temporarily happy with us, which just kind of unwinds the whole, the whole relationship we have. The last thing I'll say, and I know there's other specifics, is before you give your kid a phone, I highly recommend making them write out a contract before you do a contract with them. This was huge in our family. I'm like, you want this phone? Like, what do you think matters? And like, I remember, like, if he would have come with like a couple scribbles on a Post-it, that would have been a really good sign to me that he doesn't actually want the phone that badly, or not like for the right reasons. So I'm like, I want you to really think about it. And I was actually very impressed by, like, I mean, there were many more things we needed to add on, But there was stuff about, texting and reporting things and cyberbullying, just like, and so I think the main point here is when you're involving your kid, involve them in the responsibility of this, right? And you can see, I think there's actually a lot of steps here. And I would tell your kid in the contract too, my number one job is to keep you safe. This is a very tricky thing to say side by side to giving you a phone. Because at your age, it's very hard to stay safe on a phone. Like, there are just things that you could have access to. There's things that could happen. And so, yes, you're going to get a phone. And every so often, we're going to talk about it. And just so you know, that is a moment where I could change some of these guidelines. We could change apps. Sweetie, that's really not a threat. I'm saying that because, this is going to be a broken record, my number one job is to keep you safe. And so that's where it would come from.
I know we're at time. This flew by. But I want to get just one last one in. We can do it quick.
Right.
But I think so many of us as parents have an enormous amount of guilt. And we don't feel like we're doing enough. We're spending enough time. We're making the right decisions. And I'd actually love to know what you do in your life with your kids to sort of lessen the burden of the parent guilt.
Great question to add on. Yes, because I know, like, if I was in your seat, right, I'd be having like parallel process in my head. I'd be like, there was some things that are really, really useful, and I think I'm gonna do that. And another voice would be like, I've messed up my kid forever. I messed them up forever. Oh my goodness, I'm a horrible parent. And I think that goes back to giving you all credit for coming. I mean, that's like, I find learning to be an incredibly brave thing, to be open to hearing an idea. Because whenever we hear a new idea, and when it's about something you care about, which you care deeply about your kid, I know that about everyone here, then like it's a fine line because you learn something new, but at the same time you can almost shut down. You're like, I feel guilty, I feel horrible. And so again, you're all very brave for being here. All the things I've talked about, I mean this, I do not do that all with my kid, right? I yell at my kid, I say things I don't want to, I say I'm gonna be really present for them to start the day, instead I'm on my phone. And so I think there's a couple things we can do around that. Number one, just reminding yourself, I mean, it's like, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. That's not just something I say. Like, I feel like I now talk to enough parents to know that that is actually true. It's like a fact. I've done a survey. And I am not a perfect parent at all. And again, I said, like, I wouldn't want to be. That's not what our kids need. Two, there's no strategy that really can have as much relational impact as repair. We actually know that from research. And if you think about what repair is kind of the act of going back to a moment that didn't feel good and kind of reconnecting, right? I think it's saying like, hey, I was on my phone when you were trying to talk to me, and I'm sure that felt really annoying, and I'm gonna try not to do that. Or maybe it's saying, hey, I yelled at you last night, and I'm sure that felt really scary. And it's never your fault when I yell. And I'm working on managing, my feelings, just like we talk about you managing your feelings, right? And what we're doing, and this is gonna be thematic, is you're going back to a moment that felt bad, right? Where you yelled at your kid. We think events are what impact our kid. I yelled at my kid. I messed up my kid forever. Events are not what impact a kid. It's the aloneness after the event that impacts a kid, right? Again, think about at work. Like, you're yelled at in a meeting. Like, yeah, that feels bad. But think about what it would be like all day if you're in your office after and let's say it's your boss, doesn't come say anything to you. That feels way worse. If they come and they're like, hey, that was not okay. And that was a me thing, not a you thing. And I'm gonna say something to everyone tomorrow, and I'm so sorry. The event didn't feel good, but the way it lives on in your body is completely different. Even trauma, a word that people say, is this gonna traumatize? Trauma is not an event. It's the way an event was processed in aloneness in your body, which actually is so hopeful because you're like, I guess I don't have to be perfect with all my events. And I like how Adam Grant always says, like, I'm gonna crush my second score. My first score, I yelled at my kid, not great. My second score, my second grade, I'm gonna get an A. I'm gonna go and make that repair, right? So repair to me is a critical, like, everyday part of my relationship with my kid. Hey, I'm sorry I yelled. Hey, can I try that again? I think sometimes we wait too long. It's like, hey, can I try that again? Sorry, that did not come out the way I wanted it to come out, right? I'm sure that felt scary when I was yelling. I was on my phone, right? Or a bigger one, right? I know parents who say, what about, it's not one thing. Hey, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think for the first, lot of years of your life, I just kind of sent you to your room when you were upset. And I've been reading, I've been learning, and like if I could go back, I would have done that differently. I'm sure that felt really bad. Right? And again, I always imagine, like, what if your parent called you? It's like, hey, I think a lot of your childhood, I just kind of sent you away or yelled at you when you were actually having a hard time. And those moments probably felt bad. You were right to feel that way, and I'm sorry. I just don't know one adult who's like, I would feel nothing. You know, like it would register. It wouldn't change everything, but repair matters. The last thing I'll say about that, I think doing kind of check-ins with your kids is like very humbling and very connecting also. It's like, hey, what is the one thing that if I did differently would make me a better parent to you? It's kind of like a 360 review at work, right? Really, imagine if your boss said, like, what is like some small thing I do that really annoys you? And then on a different day, like, what are some bigger things I could work on? I don't even know if you'd have to tell them the thing. You'd already feel better in your relationship, right? And when you receive it, you can just say, I'm so glad you're sharing that with me. I believe you. Tell me more. And the one thing I'll say about that is rarely will a young kid say, like, I wish you would just validate my feelings more, Dad. Like, they're not going to say that, I know. And I think that we get frustrated, or people think it doesn't work when your kid says, you can give me more candy. That totally isn't working. Because then you can say, oh, you love candy. What kind of candy would I give you? Oh, I'd give you Starburst. Oh, which flavor? Oh, the red? What's so good about the red? What would you eat them for breakfast? Would it be for lunch? Oh, like your breakfast, lunch, and dinner would be Starburst? Oh my goodness. What you've just done is just join your kid's world. And then your kid might say, so you're gonna do it? And you can say, look, I don't know, this is tricky. Like, I'm so glad I know that you love Starburst, and I might be able to get you a few more Starburst here and there. I mean, one of my jobs as your parent is to help make good decisions, and Starburst for breakfast, lunch, and dinner is just pushing it a little bit. But knowing how much you love Starburst, like, that's really important for me to know that that's your favorite candy. And I'm so glad you shared that with me. And I'm gonna cry, but imagine if that was you. And then the next day your parent came home from like a business trip, and instead of bringing you some like snow globe, they brought you like a thing of Starburst or something. Like, think about so whatever your kids share with you is like an opportunity to go into their world. And so just remembering, I would say, there's no perfect parent. Thinking about the power of repair, it's everything. And doing some like kid check-ins, I would say, are things we can regularly incorporate.
I can't believe this hour is already over, but if you do want more, I'm a member of Good Inside. There's a QR code in your pamphlet today to join. And it's transformed not just my parenting, but to your point, my marriage and my work. I've got colleagues here who hopefully will attest to that. And I really do believe that Becky is building the parenting platform of the future. It is the most innovative and interesting and rewarding thing for me to feel in community with everybody else who's going through the same problems. And even as I was preparing for this event and asking those of you that I know here, like, what do you think we should talk about? I felt even more in community with some of my girlfriends who've never shared. Like, I have a kid who's kind of the weird one. You know, I have this kind of kid. And so I also just encourage you to talk to one another more vulnerably as parents, as moms and dads, and share what's going on with your kids. I think everyone here just wants to feel normal, right? And normal is different in every family. So I also just want to thank, while I'm at it, the sponsors who've made some goodie bags for you. They're in the back of the program that we handed out tonight, and I know some of you are here. If you want more from Dr. Becky, follow her on Instagram, sign up for Good Inside, and what else can we say? Where will we find you next?
I don't know, probably, goodinside.com is the home to everything we do. We have a great email, goes out every, Thursday. Actionable,
the podcast,
all the things. But thank you for all being here. This has been amazing. You're all amazing, and thank you.
And thank you to Marin Horizon for helping to host this. Thank you, guys.